Good morning. I'm Dr. Gus Penix, President of the Nicholas County Board of Education. I'd like to welcome everyone to this special meeting of the Board of Education. We're holding it here at the board office on Thursday morning, April the 28th at 10 a.m. Would you please rise and join the board in a moment of silent reflection, just an opportunity to reflect on those things for which we have to be thankful, but also to clear our hearts and our minds for the business we're going to talk about here this morning. So, moment of silent reflection, please. Thank you. Would you please join the board in saluting our country with the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. You may be seated. I'd like to begin the meeting by saying that Mrs. Kaufman and I did not plan our wardrobes together this morning, but we both ended up with the same color sweaters on, or shirts, I guess. We will begin with action items, and on your agenda number 3, approval to place Neola policy sections 3,000, 4,000 on the 20-day comment period. Mrs. Atkins.
Yes, so policy 3,000 and 4,000, this deals with professional and service employees. They were loaded in your board packet, so I'll entertain any questions that you have.
Again, just to refresh us, we're preparing and hopefully having the new policy manual in place by July 1st.
Correct.
This year.
Correct.
And so we're just putting these sections out that have already been worked on.
Correct.
By both board and employees.
And reviewed by Neola.
And reviewed by Neola, and we're putting them out on a 20-day comment period for the public to look at and comment on. Okay. Are there any questions for Mrs. Atkins in regard to policy sections 3,000 and 4,000?
How long does this have to be? How long does this update? I mean, how often is it done? Because I know this is the first time, I think,
Well,
we've done it since I've been on the board.
Correct. So what we're doing, we're just in the process of transferring all of our policies to Neola. So once they're there, we'll just update policies as we're required to by law when there's changes in the law, or if we decide we want to handle something a little differently than what we have.
I think a good example of this is if you were to look at our current policy manual, you might find some of the policies in there were approved in 1981.
Yes.
And are 75 or something like that. So Neola is bringing these policies into line with law for us. And so after this point, they will continue to update us as legislation changes or State Board of Education policy changes. They will continually upgrade our policies to match what state code says. Or what.
They'll automatically send us templates for any changes in policy that are required because of the changes in federal or state law or state board policy.
Any questions for Mrs. Atkins on policy section 3,000 to 4,000? Hearing none. Item B under action items is approval of the MOU with the Nicholas County Airport Authority. Is that you, Mrs. Atkins?
Yeah.
They don't, it's just a continuation of.
Right.
January
So and actually, if you'd like, we can go make a copy of this really quick. It's just a continuation of an MOU that we already have in place. And what this addendum says is the Board of Education of Nicholas County, West Virginia, statutory corporation, the Nicholas County Airport Authority, a public corporation and political subdivision of the state of West Virginia, enter into this addendum number 1 to the lease entered into between them dated June 1st, 2021 for approximately 1.26 acres located in the Glade Creek, Hamilton District, Nicholas County, as more fully described in the lease. This is the AirEvac. And so what we're doing is we're just extending the term of the lease until May 31st of this year.
2022?
Yes.
Okay, so that's just a month.
Correct.
Month and a half, yeah, we're over a month.
Yeah.
I would, if you wouldn't mind, maybe we could make a copy for board members, but
Sure.
you've explained it very clearly. We're just extending that lease agreement through May 31st of 2022. We're already in the agreement, we're just extending it through May 31st. But I appreciate if you give board members a copy of that. Are there any questions on that? Hearing none, is there a motion to approve action items A and B as presented this morning?
So moved.
Mr. Amy moves. Is there a second to the motion?
Second.
Mr. Berry seconds. Any further discussion in regard to action items A and B? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed to the motion, same sign. Madam Secretary, the motion passes unanimously. We have no finance items today, correct, Mr. Hess? It just says finance, so.
No normal finance other, right.
Could you define the term normal?
Our traditional stuff.
All right. We're moving right along. Personnel, is there a need for an executive session?
No.
Okay. Madam, Mrs. Atkins, please present personnel.
Yes, just a couple of minor changes. They are in red. I will read them. Under consent, correct the minutes of April 19th, 2022 to reflect that Erica Groves was hired as a substitute secretary accountant. She was inadvertently listed as a clerk and that needed to be secretary. And under volunteers, the incorrect name was listed there for John Clark. It is Perry.
Is it Erica?
Erica, yeah, and so there's another typo even in that.
Okay.
Do we have the minutes for April 19th?
They'll be approved on Monday.
Yeah, so this will just give her permission to go in and change that.
Oh, thank you. Are there any further questions for Mrs. Atkins in regard to the personnel list? Hearing none, is there a motion to approve the personnel list as presented this morning?
So moved.
Mrs. Kaufman moves. Is there a second to the motion?
Second.
Mr. Berry seconds. Any further discussion in regard to the personnel list that's been presented today? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, like sign. Madam Secretary, the motion passes unanimously. We are on item 6, and the main reason we're meeting today is a budget workshop. There will be no action taken as a result of the presentation today. That is action that we will take in May when we approve the budget. Correct, Mr. Hess?
Yes.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Hess, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
It's that time of the year again. We get to review, set our budget for next year. So our goal today is to kind of go in detail of our projected budget for the 2022-23 school year. And as you guys know, our budget is it's our starting point. And budgets are subject to change, and they do change. Every time we have a meeting, we do budget transfers and supplements. And so we are either moving items around or supplementing our budget because of a new grant or something to that effect. So this is where we start. And so what I'd like to do is kind of run through that, talk about in detail some lines. Other lines we'll just talk about the totals to try to minimize the pain. If you guys have any questions along the way, stop, me, and we'll talk about that. So we'll get started.
I have one. Last time you gave us a projected levy
Uh-huh.
at $5,329,000.
Mm-hmm.
I'm confused.
Okay. That's my first thing we're going to talk about.
Okay. Never mind.
All right. So this is my 21st budget I prepared for this board. So I've got, surprisingly, this, you see it skips from column A to U. I have all the history of every year that I've ever done there. And so part of the processes of me developing the budget is to go back and look historically, what have our expenses been? You know, what did we budget last year? What are our current expenses? What projected expenses are we going to have in the upcoming year that is new? Fuel prices, so on and so forth. So it's a process of, you know, evaluating our personnel. Who are we going to have next year? How many are we going to have? How many are we over the formula? Looking at those overhead costs, looking at the revenues. Do we project more in some areas, less in others? And so, like I say, we're going to run through that, and if you have any questions, just stop me. So, as you can see, we're going, for comparative purposes, we have 2019 and 20 actual activity. Then we have, 19, 20, and 21 actual activity. Then we have the activity in the current year through April 1st. Then we have a copy of last year's budget, and then my projected budget for next year. And so to try to help explain, some of these areas you're going to see are highlighted, and they're just areas for me that I want to look at particularly. And just like this one, it has a formula in there to help me not forget something. So you're going to see some highlights down through here, different colors. You'll notice that in some instances, like the very first line, this is our regular levy, and in 19 we collected 5.5 million, 6.1 million, and 20, 5.6, and $5.2 million this year. Last year we only budgeted $4.4 million. So it looks like we are budgeting a lot less than what we actually were receiving. But there's a reason for that in budget. And I'm going to click on that one and show you. This is the amount that we projected on our proposed levy call. And it's in my formula, $5,329,605. So we start with this number here. So what I have in my budget column doesn't always exactly equal what transpires in the actual side. This is a good example, because even though I am budgeting $5.3 million in total, it's broken down into a couple of different lines. 4.3 of that is budgeted in this particular line, and then it also, part of this 5.3 is also budgeted in cell 27, 31, and 33, which happens to be state contribution for food service. I can't remember what it was. 31 is step 1 and 2, which is $16,525, and then 33, which we don't have any for this year. So if you add all three of those up, it would equal the proposed levy. So even though we will collect it, and you'll see that activity in the actual side, when it comes to budget, I have to make sure that my revenue is spread out in a variety of different areas, so that I know that I have enough budget to cover that.
Just a question. So that looks like, is that regular levy there? You were just talking about local revenues?
Mm-hmm. First line, yep.
Yeah, and so part of that, part of the levy amount, the total levy amount, you're going to pay for salaries like cooks and other things that are down in the budget, but they're coming from that regular levy.
Exactly.
Okay, gotcha.
Exactly, yes. Yeah, part of, food service is a little different, because they require us to keep that in a whole different fund, and it's operated like a little business. And so the board's is responsible for making sure that the food service program breaks even every single year. Part of the And so I track all of those expenses down here separately, and then I track the revenue, the reimbursement from the federal government separately. But what we don't have over here is the state aid portion of revenue that we get to cover the cook's salaries. So essentially, what the $1 million you see down here in food service is our contribution to the food service program to cover those salaries, or to break even. Jumping ahead just a little bit, you'll see that I budgeted $741,000 last year. This year, we're going to have to budget $1,010,898, and that's simply because we are projecting two reasons. We're going back to the National School Lunch Program, which is a different type of reimbursement, which is a lesser amount of reimbursement, and also the State Department has recommended that we increase our food allowances because food costs are going to be higher next year than they have been. So we've calculated, estimated what we feel like that's going to be for the upcoming year. And so that number is higher. Now, to make us feel a little bit better about that maybe, this rate that we contribute to the food service program has historically been about 38%. And last year when it was 741,000, it was a lot less than 38%. So when I ran the numbers and calculated what I felt like we were going to need for the food service program, it was oddly, it was at 38% again. So it's not so much that we're that far out of line as we were pre-COVID. During COVID, we had larger reimbursements for our food service program, so therefore the county didn't have to kick in as much money. Does that make sense?
It does.
So that, again, we will collect at least $5.3 million if everyone pays their taxes. And then next year, when you see this actual activity, you're going to see that $5.3 million that we approved in our levy call should show up over here. And you can see in this year, we've already collected $5.2 million of last year's levy call, and we still have April, May, and June. So it'll be a little bit higher by the end. See, last year I budgeted $5.2 million, and we're already $251,000. So we're $51,000 away from making budget of what we budgeted last year.
We still have 3 months to collect.
Still have 3 months. We'll meet that.
Yeah.
We'll get it. So that's our regular levy. This is our excess levy. And this is the amount that we project that we will collect net on the excess levy collections throughout the school year. Again, it's just an estimate. All of this is just an estimate based on historical data and what we feel like we may collect. Historically, 4.3, 4.3, 4.7, 4.1 through this year. So we'll probably collect a little bit more than 4.2.
Question on that. We have the excess levy call, which specifies certain amounts for certain areas. And are we projecting that we will collect 100% of the excess levy?
Yes.
Okay, good, that's good.
It should cover everything that's in the levy call, plus some.
One other question. When these regular levy and the excess levies, these payments that we receive from the county, they come in on a monthly basis, right?
Yes.
And you just, every month, hopefully, and by the end of the year, you hope that you collect the full amount that you're supposed to, but they come in on a monthly basis
They do.
from the sheriff.
I make a trip to the courthouse every month to pick up the funds.
When you have overages at the end of the year, what happens to that? Does it get thrown in contingency or?
Overages, so we try to take care of overages throughout the year when the transfers and supplements. If I see an area's getting over budget or it exceeds, like fuel, I'm going to use that a lot today. Fuel costs, I see that it's going to exceed my budget, we'll transfer money around sometimes to make that project more closely reflect what we feel like the expenses are going to be. These extra collections in like excess levy or extra monies that we collect maybe in interest or in regular levy, they help cover those overages. That's what we, you'll see at the end of the year, collect any extra. You'll see us, I'll do an entry at the end of the year that will reallocate that extra down to different areas that we need it. All right, so those are first two lines are pretty big. If you look at then, we're just rolling down to here. I've broken this down into three sections: our local revenue, our state revenue, and our federal revenue.
Can you reallocate both the regular and excess, or just the regular?
The excess levy call, funds that are collected over and above the levy call have to be spent for legal school expenditures. So once we meet the levy call requirements, then we can spend it for anything that, whether it's keep people employed or any overhead expenses. Same way with the regular levy, as long as it's a legal school expenditure. Bank interest, boy, I'm working with Truist right now to try to increase that rate. We have a lot of our money with United Bank, and they're paying a little bit better. Most of our money is with them actually, but my checking account with Truist is just tough right now, and so I'm only going to budget $25,000. I've only collected $22,000 this year in interest. So, and you can see where I've been in the past with interest. And that's just the funds that we have here at the county. It doesn't include, all the federal FEMA money, we don't receive any of that until we've already spent it. So we spend it, I requisition it, we get it, we send it out. So none of that interest is federal related. It's all our own county money. Our interest rates were a lot better back in 19 and 20 compared to what they are right now. And we'd moved some money back in those years to United, which was paying a ton better than where we had it previously. So that's where I'm at with interest. Hopefully it'll be a little bit better than that, which we never have.
Kevin, what affects the interest rate? Inflation?
It's usually based upon the Fed rate. Banks adjust their rates based upon those federal markers. I don't know the details of how, as the economy fluctuates, interest rates rise and fall, and the market value of those flow right down to every savings and checking account. As far even on the loan side, your interest rates fluctuate with the economy. So now you're going to see on the expense side, interest rates start to rise. And so hopefully that will bring these rates on the revenue side up as well eventually.
Federal Reserve makes it.
Yes, exactly. Rental income, we receive $100 a month for a Faltish Center for that school that we own at Medicaid. There's some miscellaneous revenue, and that could be anything from insurance reimbursements or for an accident we may have, or just something that doesn't fall into another category. Again, those revenues are kind of depleting.
Could that be where we had two of our buses were accidents?
Yep. Yeah. That's where that would go. Then we have local food service revenues. That's where we have to pay. We receive catered meals, pay for catered meals, and that's averages pretty well around $40,000. Catered meals meaning parents come in or and pay for lunches, or Friends Are Fun buys lunches. Oh wait, it's it's in our preschool collaborative. One of those organizations pays for the lunches that we provide, and that's the bulk of that. Student activities, that's where we're reimbursed when when our students take field trips and they take our buses, the schools have money for that, and so they'll pay us for the bus driver's wages for the day and a small mileage fee. And you can see pre-COVID, we were around $104,000 countywide, and so through COVID, that we were not taking so many trips, and so that fell. And so it may go back up, but I'm only going to budget $40,000 next year. I will only receive 44 so far this year. And that'll probably go up as the end of the year, more field trips will take place, and so we'll probably be a little higher than that. But conservatively, I want to stick around 40.
Like our, start at the Career Center, like, do they cater sometimes, like a lunch somewhere or something that's going on? Do they help, like at the Armory? With
People do order things from them, and that stays with their budget, if I'm not mistaken.
That's-
They have their own
That's
separate
separate
budget.
Okay.
school, yeah.
And I'm glad you mentioned that, because I hope, if you can clarify again, catering is absolutely not catering services for this board.
Oh, gosh, no.
So make sure that, please explain that.
Yeah, catering meaning that we are preparing food that's reimbursed for another organization. And I'm pretty sure that's Friends of Fun, pays us to provide meals for their school or their preschool program. Then we call it catering anytime it's not for our students. And so if a parents come in for Thanksgiving and we have an event there and they have to pay for their meal, that goes into the catering category, local revenue for food service. Okay, so I'm going to come back down to this number later, but you can see right now it's $685,000 compared to $1.8 million last year, and that's the amount that is required to balance this budget that comes out of our contingency funds. So let's just to tell you what that is, and we'll be back to that number here shortly. So in total, locally, our budget is going to be $9.4 million this year. It was 9.5. It's 10.7 last year. This year. I get my years mixed up. And 10.5, 10.5, 10.3. So it's a little bit less, but there are reasons for that. One, here's a $250,000 increase that we're having to put into the food service program. And this amount of revenue required, it's not really revenue, this amount is $1.2 million less than it was last year. So we're requiring less money out of our contingency fund, so therefore the total local amount of revenues required is less. So traditionally, this number has always been $1 million, 1.1 million, 1.2. Last year it happened to hit at 1.8. It would be a lot higher, and if there's a couple things we're going to talk about in just a second, this is exceptionally low because of a couple reasons, and we're going to talk about that in a second. So locally, $9.4 million for next year. That's basically the amount that we're going to kick in for contingency and our local taxes.
Now, am I missing the category again? Unless you didn't have the right glasses on last time. We said 9,572,776. 9,572,776. That's off about 150,000.
Now, where do we have? That was probably
From the
looking
total.
at on the proposed levy rates. Is that where you're getting at? Right. There are things in here. These items are added to that. Trying to think of.
What about CARES money? Where's that coming in
That'll be
at? In the next,
that'll be down in the federal
okay.
part. Our budget, I'd have to go back and look at that, Mr. Moose, and see. Our budget, these amounts right here should exactly equal what's on the proposed levy rates. $5.3 million and this $4.2 million which is total of $9.5 million, equals what was on the proposed levy rates, the net amount on the proposed levy rates. And so, in addition to, so we budget that, and part of the problem that is you don't see all of it right here in this top part, because down in the state portion, I've got $1 million of that down in a different section, which is the part that we're going to contribute to the food service program. Does that make sense? So,
No. Go ahead.
So this number, if it was all together and we was looking at how much was regular levy, you can see I have $5.3 million, but there are some subtractions from that. And I have to subtract from that regular levy a portion that we're going to spend in other areas. Well, part of those other areas are these green lines right here, which is down in the state section. So it's not included. It's not included in this 9.4. It really, if we were trying to reconcile exactly, you would see this number and this number would be up here in line 1 with regular and excess levy taxes. It's kind of hard to explain it.
So Kevin, the sheet that Mr. Moose is referring to is the levy rates that we approved the other day. The amount of $9.5 million from that levy sheet are in your budget.
Sure, yes.
Okay, the first part is you're counting that, first of all, as coming from local sources, the regular levy of I can't read it up here, but $4-something million there. But the remainder of that is down in the state where you have to provide funding to the, not to the state, but to pay for food services that the state doesn't pay for.
Right.
And that would be salaries and the increased cost of food. So you're just, that money is down in that part of the budget.
Right, right. It's just, it's right. I've taken part of that local tax and I've divided between 3 different lines. One of it's here, which happens to be in the local section, and then the other 2 sections of that are down in the state section. And we put that down in the state section, the state contribution for food, simply because it's part of state aid. And you'll see this is where my state aid's at. So part of the monies that we're receiving for state aid is contributed to the food service program. I try to leave all that money together, and I pull a portion of that money out of our regular levy as opposed to the state aid line. It's as broad as it is long. You're only dealing with so much money. And we have these expenses to pay for. So whether it comes out of our regular levy, our excess levy, or state aid, we're just trying to make the budget balance.
Isn't state aid, is it not, like, associated with enrollment? Like how much we get per student, or?
It is based, I want to say primarily on enrollment, but there are a lot of factors that go into that. It's not only on enrollment. There are transportation allowances in there. There's different wage calculations. There's a lot. It's a huge 10-step process, but a lot of it is when enrollment drops, you can almost guarantee that your state aid's going to drop. So, did that answer your question?
Go ahead. I can come back. I'm not an accountant, so obviously I'm not going to.
Well, just, I want to show you where that, if you'll look at that 4.2, okay, and then right there is the 5.3.
Right.
So if you add those 2 together, that's your 9.5 that you're asking about. So it's in there, but we just have a subtraction essentially. But it's fully in there, and the whole 9.5 is in there in total. So we're looking at 9.4 is what I project at the local level, then for budgeting purposes. And then we get down into state revenue. Again, if you look at step 8 on the state aid formula, it says that our total, or I'm sorry, step 10 of state aid formula, it's going to say that Nicholas County is funded at $18,366,557. And you can see, historically, 16.8, 18.6, 17.7. So far this year, 18.6. So if everything goes as planned, then we'll receive $18.3 million next year for state aid. I only have budgeted 16.7. Again, because I take things out of that have to be paid or requirement, but there's no revenue source for it. So I have to come up with or set aside money just for that. So, for example, step 7 is included in that grand total of state aid. Bus replacement is included in that grand total of state aid. Steps 1 and 2, 60 curriculum trips, advanced placement technology. All of those, most of those are, you can see there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 items that we're required to do that the only revenue source for is state aid. And so the net state aid, once I've met those requirements, the net amount that I want to have available for state aid is $16.7 million. You can see I budgeted $16.2 million last year. Our budget last year was 17.8, and so far we've received 18.6. And so it's a little bit higher than what we had projected in our budget.
That's always good.
It's always good, yeah. And that could be, they could have increased funding for a particular area or a miscellaneous state grant, a variety of reasons why that's higher than budget. But we, at the minimum, we should collect our 17.8, so it's in good shape.
Mr. Hess, state aid is outlined in state code, correct?
Yes.
And it has 10 steps to it, right?
Yes.
So you're showing up there that the state, the very top line, that you have to meet those requirements that you've listed down there in step 7 of the state aid formula and other parts of the state aid formula. But if you added all those up, you'd get that total amount that we're supposed to get from the state. Is that correct?
That's correct.
What is it, $18 million?
18, right here. $18,366,557.
So you've broken that out into the steps in the formula.
That's correct.
Okay.
That's correct. So if you would go and you would look at the state aid formula for Nicholas County, and you go to step 10, which is the amount that's actually sent, you would see that it says $18.3 million.
Now,
There are other state revenues that we put in here. PEIA, we're estimated to receive $3.2 million to help pay for that. That pays for everybody that's under the formula. People that we have employed over and above the formula, or federal employed, people are paid through a federal grant. We do not receive PEIA for that. So $3.2 million is the allocation. Same thing for retirement. It only covers those employees that are under the retirement, that are covered under the state aid formula.
And if they're not, then we have to pay that out of the general budget.
Yep. Yep. So there again, that's where these extra collections come in, things to keep up. So we want to try to get as much out of interest or anything we can to help us cover and keep those people employed. Here's that food service line that we were talking about. Unfortunately, it's about $250,000 more than what it was last year. So we'll see how this next year transpires for food service as we move back into something that is similar to being normal. Bus replacement is a little bit down over last year at $337,000. Step 7 is up by $18,000. Step 7 we use for a variety of different things. There's about $130,000 for personnel costs. We pay for supplies, we pay for textbooks, we pay for some technology. Lots of things come out of that step 7. Steps 1 and 2 is staff development, both professional and service. That one's your factory senate. The $104,400 is the amount of money that we're allocated to for factory cent purposes at $400 per employee that's covered under the state aid formula. Curriculum trips is no longer required. However, even though I didn't put it in this line, you're going to see it down here it's part of this number right here. They just kind of get away with it as far as funding it. They say this is your state aid. If you want, you're not required to budget it any longer. If you want to, you can, but we're not earmarking any money just for curriculum trips. I have chosen to keep that in the budget for the schools. They depend and they rely on that to take some of their trips. So you're going to see here in just a minute that I budgeted $6,500 for next year for them. Advanced placement is up slightly for $400. Technology is up about $20,000, and teacher and leader induction is up about $5,000 over last year. Now, the retirement unfunded liability. So the state, on our behalf, contributes money to the retirement program for our employees. And so even though we don't receive that money, they require us to take that allocation, record it as revenue in our budget, and then also record it as an expense. And so it just flows in and it flows out, but it's in our numbers, and it really skews a lot of my fixed charges on my salaries quite a bit more than what it should, or than what they actually are. But I get to record almost $4 million in revenue that I'm not actually going to have. So it washes in, it washes out.
That advanced placement, is that just textbooks and supplementary material or what? I mean, that you can't possibly.
That's a good. Sorry, I didn't turn my phone on. Advanced placement. That is, I would probably want to talk to Sarah and see exactly what she spends that money for. It's for, those students that are excelling above.
It's not AP courses.
It's AP courses.
Yeah,
It's AP courses.
It's paying for the test and for materials, is my understanding. And this board continues to pay for the test. So
Yes, you're right.
It's been test and materials.
You're exactly right, yes. That's exactly right. So that's what advanced placement is. So this, we talked about this retirement on behalf. So then we have some state grants, and that's from vocational, it's special education, it's alternative ed. You're going to see those in just a minute. But they haven't given me an allocation for next year yet, so we're budgeting exactly what it was for last year. And you'll see that throughout the year, you'll see me do a budget transfer, and I'll say this is a correction of the original budget, because we don't know what that is. We budget based upon an estimate, and then when we actually get the allocation, it might be next October or whatever, it's plus or minus the original budget. So we go in and we adjust that budget to what it actually is. So at the state level, $28.1 million is our projected revenue. A little bit higher than last year, but remember, I've got $250,000 in here food service, which is really coming from local funds to increase that. There's some other increases, but just a little bit higher state and state aid. 26.4, 27.8, 26.4, and 28.1. As you know, they gave a raise to all of our employees from the state, so the state aid is going to be a little bit higher to cover those employees that are under the state aid formula. So our state aid should have been a little higher than last year as well. Now, our third section of revenue is federal. National Forest land money, you can see I haven't, we received just a small portion of that, and I don't even budget it anymore. I never know from year to year if I'm going to get it. It's dwindled in amounts. It's actually so small, I think I have it up in the miscellaneous revenue section. So it's not even showing up down here in this section anymore as an actual.
What's it for?
National Forest Lands is, and it's mineral management and leasing of lands. There's 3 different categories to that, and it's where the federal government has like the national forest. It's part of Nicholas County. So the government owns the land, so no one's paying taxes on that. So therefore, the regular levy and excess levy taxes are less because no one's paying tax on that land that they have. So they reimburse us for having a national forest in our county. So
Kevin, what, 10 or 12, 15 years ago, didn't we receive up in 200, 300,000?
no,
No,
I don't think
never
so.
that high. Maybe I'm thinking of Pocahontas.
Pocahontas and Webster, they receive a lot. Ours has always been around 50, but that used to be. And it's a lot less than that now. We'll receive some, but it won't be that much probably. Medicaid reimbursement, you can see, we used to get about $800,000 a year, and it really helped us keep people employed over and above the formula and so on and so forth. And it has dwindled down to a little bit of nothing comparatively. We'll still take the $200,000, $300,000. I budgeted $150,000 last year. So far, we've only received $29,000. There's a year-end requisition that we do, and so we're still on track to receive that. It'll just be later in the year. And then discussing that with Misty and Kristen, we feel like for next year we'll receive close to $250,000. So I feel comfortable enough to budget that as revenue. Federal reimbursements. Again, this is what we feel like we're going to get from our food service program next year, $1.6 million. It's higher this year. We're under a different program, summer feeding program, because of COVID. So that's what I feel comfortable with, $1.6 million.
Where, like, the free lunches, does that come out of federal money or does that come out of state?
Well, we have 2 aspects of free lunches. There's a certification where students qualify for free lunch. But we offer free lunch to all of our students through the excess levy. So it's income calculated, basically. But all of our students receive free lunch. Here's a biggie, indirect cost. Indirect cost is, we normally get about $40,000. As you can see, $41,000, $65,000, and then it went to $270,000, and so far it's already $154,000 this year. Indirect cost is the amount of money, it's like 1.48%. It changes every year, but it's the amount of money that we're able to bill federal programs for providing that grant and to the students. So Title I, for example, we have a federal program. They're housed in our building. We use our utilities. We use our supplies. It's in all of our schools. So every federal grant allows the fiscal agent to charge a processing fee, essentially. And so typically, under normal circumstances, it was about $40,000 a year to process probably close to $7 million in federal grants. This is, we had 3 rounds of ESSER or stimulus monies, and so those are federal grants, and so that's about $15 million. And so as we spend those monies, we are allowed to charge that indirect cost. And so next year, based upon what we project, because those funds, some of those funds will expire in September of '23. The rest of them will expire in September '24. We expect to generate about $500,000 in indirect cost. So that goes to help provide those services, and then anything over and above, you can use it for legal school expenditures. Now, that being said, this monies, that $15 million, it has several people employed, and so as those funds expire, then we will have to determine how we're going to fund those employees, if we choose to keep them, or we'll have to make alterations at that time to adjust our personnel to reflect our revenues.
So like a lot of our counselors and stuff like that, are they, a lot of them employed through grants?
There's about, yes, there's about, again, round numbers, approximately 13 aides and about 8 to 10 professionals that are paid out of those federal funds right now. Okay, so then this last section, the $3 million, that's, you're going to see that those are our federal grants that we budget at this time. Like I said, it'll increase, we'll supplement the budget as smaller grants come in, but this is our major budget, our major federal grants. We kind of include them in this budget as well. So altogether, $5.4 million in federal funds. Total revenue for the next school year is $42,968,331. That's new revenue. So we have things in place right now, like our Title I monies, our construction projects, monies that are going on right now. They're not included in this because at the end of the year, we'll simply roll those available balances into the new school year. And in October, you'll see that I'll come to you with a huge supplement that says we're carrying over those funds from the previous school year. This is all new revenue. This doesn't include anything that's in the current budget.
Kevin, what was the total on state aid, state revenue?
Total state revenue is $28,105,488. $28,105,488. So 42.9 is our total budget. I have 43.2 for last year, and you can see those are up a little bit from previous years.
So we're about $300,000 less on those revenues that you've just talked about for next year from this year.
Okay.
That could vary with the special project revenues, couldn't it?
Good.
Depending on what comes out of Congress, and et cetera.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. So again, just to keep in mind, this is just an estimate, and we prepare our budget based upon our best information that we have currently available. As it changes, we change. That's the revenue side. Do you have any questions on revenue?
Kevin, a while ago, when you were talking transportation and the buses, when we order new buses, are we going to need to put air conditioning in them? Because when the students take trips and it's hot, you know, they're sitting by a lot of buses that the air conditioning's running, but not in Nicholas County. How much more does that cost? Have you ever talked that over Rocky, or?
I didn't even know that they did that.
I didn't either.
I've never had that discussion with Rocky. Certainly, if that's something that that is allowable by the state to have, then that's something that we could use our bus replacement money to. We could add that certainly. If that's something that the board wanted, then we could if it's not allowable out of state bus replacement money, then we could take it out of county funds to pay for that.
If it keeps snowing until the end of April, we won't need them.
That's true.
I can probably try to put out a statewide survey to see how many people actually have air-conditioned buses and the percentage of buses and things like that. See if I can get a response that might help make an informed decision on it.
Sure.
Yeah, I would imagine some of the valley schools down in Pinal Valley would have air conditioning because it's quite a bit hotter down there than it is here.
Mm-hmm.
And when I worked there, I couldn't wait to get back to the mountains.
Back in the day, 30-some years ago, it was called a window.
Yeah.
Roll the windows down.
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to ask that we take a recess so that we can reset the camera for SCTV. So we're gonna take a 5-minute recess and Lonnie gets that set. We're back from recess. Technology has been improved here, so we're back from recess. Mr. Hesselborn, you ready to go with expenditures?
We sure are. So, we're going to go down through the expenditures. The first section, we break the expenditures down in what they call program functions: instruction, preschool, maintenance, transportation, alternative ed, so on and so forth. And they all look very similar. We'll go down through there. I'll go through them in as much detail as you want. I'll go through this one so that you get a feel for it, and then we'll probably just talk in totals unless you want to get into the details about, because there's a bunch of them. So all of you'll see in every section, all of the salaries are broken down into blue. And for this year, we're budgeting $8.3 million for teachers and aides. I have $1.7 million budgeted for last year, 9.5, 9.5, 9.6. So it's a little bit less. What I do to calculate that is I take the current payroll, carry it over into our payroll budget, load in any raises, any changes in withholdings like insurance, update for decreases, RIFs that are widely known, that we're pretty secure, that are going to stick, and I let the system calculate it, print it off, and I'll put this total here. So it's all generated on our WEVA system based upon what we have currently, plus or minus any adjustments. So it's a little bit less. Substitutes, this is the amount of money that we are budgeting for substitutes next year. Is $411,000 last year. Apparently I messed up that formula, but the allocation from the state is about half of what our true substitute costs are actually. And so I put that in this line under instruction. And you're going to see I budget substitute costs in other areas as well. I just try to cover that total. Fixed charges is $4.5 million. So total, we're looking at $13.4 million for regular instruction, salaries and fixed charges.
No, there's nothing budgeted for any of the distance learning, homebound instruction, and is that small, so small that you're going to fill that in as needed, or?
We don't have contract clerks anymore. We don't have, well, there is some homebound instruction, but it's more of there's not a position that does only homebound. So in years past, last 20 years, we did budget out some of these details. And so now we don't have anything that needs to be budgeted in that area. And if we do, it's covered up here in this line.
Okay.
So again, $13.4 million. Our dental optical, have two lines for that, $200,000 out of our excess levy, and $50,000 we feel like may go above and beyond that based upon, so far this year we spent 222 through April, 284 last year, 238, and 307 in the year prior. So it fluctuates, somewhere between $250,000, $300,000 should be real close.
Do employees have dental optical?
Yep. Every employee.
And the board pays for that, correct?
It's paid through our, well, part of it's paid through our excess levy, and then the board pays for the remainder. It's not a requirement, it's just something that the board does above and beyond. Now, so after we get out of the salaries in every section, you're going to get into the section that I refer to as overhead. And it's things that fall into the category that's not salary. So we have some travel expenses, 8,700 that I'm calculating. When you see a purple amount, that means it's an excess levy amount that I have budgeted. 36,501 is one of the fragments of the textbook category. So really textbook and technology now is one category under the excess levy, and it's about $800,000. And so 36 of that's right here. The remainder is down in other lines. Educational activities, $35,000, and that's for things above and beyond. It's like sending our kids to state math field days, state spelling bee, state competitions, things outside our region that require funds that, so we want our kids to participate in those things. So it's in the excess levy to allow $35,000 for that.
That includes career center.
So in the instruction area, we're going to budget $13.7 million. We budgeted $14.7 last year. Most of that's in the salary line.
You don't have anything there for bands. I know they take a lot of trips. Is that paid for out of their school funds or?
It's going down in the bottom
It's on down in the
section.
bottom.
Yeah. Most of the bands, the county really doesn't pay bands and athletics. The county doesn't have a lot of expense. Most of the monies that we receive for that is through the excess levy. So you'll see that I think it's $40,000 and $48,000 for band and athletics, and then there's admission money that also kind of goes for athletics, right? So we funnel all that money to the schools, and that helps pay for trips and so on and so forth. They also do a ton of fundraising. Pretty much our athletics, other than the coaching, is pretty self-sufficient. So we'll jump into the next category, which is preschool. Again, $436,000 in salaries. $260,000 represents the amount of money that we pay Nicholas County Head Start and Friends Are Fun as part of our preschool collaborative. Same as it was last year. That looks a little funny. This is the amount that I actually pay Friends Are Fun. This number is budgeted here. The actual expense for Friends Are Fun falls right here, but then the $200,000 that we pay Friends Are Fun falls into a different category. So that's a little bit confusing in the difference in monies, but it's just how I budget it versus how it actually comes in and is paid in code. So total $696,000 for preschool. Student services, a lot of different salaries there. Fixed charges, $1,210,000 versus $1,245,000 last year.
Is this a program you use or do you set your own program?
Actually, this is my spreadsheet, but
That's your spreadsheet.
it's my spreadsheet, but Weaves calculates all the salaries for me.
Now, I was just wondering if your spreadsheet, if you had a program that you used in this, or did you do your own
Oh,
spreadsheet?
no, this is mine.
That's
I mean,
yours.
there's a ton of tabs. All of these numbers
Go back.
flow into what you're going to see as and when I present like transportation, that's what you're going to see in your budget, and it populates the numbers. Finally, I figured out, tried to make it easier on myself after 20-some years. But you know, this spreadsheet includes a lot of that. It has historically, I can go back, I reference it all the time just to see how much did you spend in electricity in 2012. Well, I can go back and I can pull that up. So I use it a lot. So total student services, $1.2 million. Then we go down into staff development, $27,888. And we look into basically technology. This is that retirement on behalf that I was talking about. It requires me to allocate that money into different categories. You don't see any salary here, but I have to record that retirement on behalf in this program function. So that looks a little odd, but again, it flows in and it flows out. Doesn't have any effect on the bottom line. Here's, of the $800,000 I've talked about in textbooks and technology, here's $450,000 in this one line to pay for a part of that in this area. So in total, $475,000. Now this is not all of our technology expenses. The salaries for our techs and the expenses that they have are on down in a different line. General administration, this is basically your salaries in the superintendent's office.
Are we doing that raise?
No raises for you.
Well, I mean, it looks like it.
It looks like it doesn't. You guys will average somewhere in this probably $25,000 range again. By budget. If 40 is if you max out your meetings per year. So then total fixed charges, $315,000. And then in this area, you're going to see some other expenses that we are kind of considered administration, contracted services, that's our calling system. Part of our liability and personal property is coded here. It's about $200,000 a year, but $50,000 of it gets coded here. Our annual audit, we pay for audits for our entire county, and then we audit each individual school, and that's about $30,000.
Then you get audited. The auditor gets audited.
Well, yeah. So administrative wise, $651,000. That's down from $686 last year. School administration, that's your principals. $2.1 million in salaries. And just a little bit of travel, a little bit of supplies for them, or a little bit of purchase services, a little bit of travel rather.
Could you back up just a second?
Sure.
On that. Okay. For 2022, it was 3,000 and projected it doubled. The activity, the amount doubled to total of 686,000. It was
Oh, it's talking about the
307.
total.
This is my activity year to date. That was through April.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
This is your history, 528, 571, 516. I budgeted 686, may or may not happen.
It'll be under probably.
Hopefully it'll be
Yeah.
under. Historically, it looks like it's gonna come in under.
Gotcha.
Our postage went up, so.
Yeah. Yeah. Postage, what, 13,000 a year or something? Postage, 7,000. It used to be, believe it or not, it used to be 13. I used to budget 13, and now we're running $6,000.
For technology, now you can email them.
Now we can email. Yeah, those certified letters are very expensive.
Almost $8 the letter.
All right, so school administration, that's your principals, $2.1 million versus just over $2 million last year. Then we get into finance. Our total salaries is $420,000 versus $407,000 last year. One of the things I did for this upcoming school year is we have a FEMA coordinator, and initially we were told that her salary would be covered under FEMA reimbursements. And just like a lot of other things, or some other things, that's capped. And so when we have been turning some of this stuff in, they cap the amount of what they call direct administration costs. And so that, all of her salary's not gonna be reimbursed. And so I've been using her for doing some Medicaid billing, we're using her some in special education. We also I use her for things unrelated to FEMA. And so it's going to be more efficient to record her FEMA time separately and charge her to the county. And so I picked her salary up under my section, just for simplicity. There's still a ton of work to do, and it's just like all of us. We all are working towards the goal of getting the schools built, but none of it's reimbursed. So it's the same story with her. There's a ton of work to be done in order to process all the FEMA stuff, but they're not going to reimburse us for it. So
Who is that FEMA coordinator? Who is the FEMA coordinator?
am I allowed to say that? And is that a personnel issue? Talk about county. I can tell you after the meeting. Is there any restrictions on talking about personnel? Nope.
He's just wanting a name.
Mhm.
I would think,
I would think that
just to
would be.
give the name.
Yeah.
It's public.
It's
Okay.
public, the name is,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay, it's Misty Carpenter.
Thank you.
All the legal stuff, something I don't want to cross the line anywhere.
My question is, who's the treasurer?
We can't say.
Can't say.
That depends on how the budget's going.
Yeah.
Personnel's just so touchy, it's just
Yeah, you gotta be careful.
Yeah.
it's always better to check for sure.
There's some things we don't talk about in the meeting, and I just want to make sure. Okay, so 4.2, or 420,000 versus 407. The difference you see here is basically me picking her up. Then, so total, we're at 517,000 versus 424 for next year. This is the personnel section, 177,000 in total payroll costs, $4,000 in purchase services, travel, supplies, fees, 181,000 versus 175,000. Then if we look into maintenance, this one gets a little lengthy. Salaries, $2.1 million versus almost $2.1 million last year. And you can see that it's about 2.2 is our average, but that includes some of our overtime. And whatnot. I budgeted for that. So we'll see how close we get to that as we go through the year. School improvements is a levy amount, $25,000 per school. And so we put $100,000 in there for next year. Then $187,000, that's our pro officers, which is provided through the excess levy. Electric, it's $595,000 was in 2021, 591, 596, I budgeted 600.
Probably not enough.
We're probably not enough, you're right.
We're after another rate increase.
So we'll monitor that. So yeah, we're at 425 through the end of, the beginning of April.
All that's covered under the levy, the first maintenance, overtime, substitutes, fixed charges.
Yeah. There's a section in there, I think I have it at the top. I'm pretty sure that number's accurate, but there's $976,000 in the levy for maintenance. And it covers salaries, it covers a lot of different things. And so you see all these purples far exceeding what's in the levy. The biggies there is our electric. That's a big bill. If we would go back years past, it was down around 300,000. And then our natural gas is it's pretty cheap, really. I mean, we use it in a lot of schools. It's only $130,000. So data lines, voicemail, or $100,000 in insurance.
Oh, insurance.
This one, this blood-related additional expenses, I budgeted that ever since we started. It's not additional amounts. In our general fund, if at the end of the year, unless I carry something forward, it disappears. And so this amount is for anything that pops up that FEMA decides that we're not reimbursed. We're already aware of some transportation costs. You know, we had we had to move our schools, we had to hire bus drivers to get kids to our new school. It's a directly resulted of the flood. It's beyond our control. We wouldn't have had that expense otherwise. We felt like initially that would be an allowable expense. It's not. FEMA says transportation, the only transportation they will cover is if you have a bus, if you provide transportation out of the immediate danger of a flood. So there are things like that we either felt like would be reimbursed or later told, no, that's not going to be reimbursed. So this is not a new budget. We have that in this year's budget. I'm simply going to carry that over in here as a fixed amount. And I budgeted 2 different lines for that. There's $100,000 there. So $4.5 million in this year's upcoming budget versus 4.3. We're spending right around $4 million a year. We'll get down to transportation. $2.2 million budget. Last year was 2.3. We're spending right about 2.3, 2.4. So.
Overtime, is that like after school activity or ball games and stuff like that for the bus drivers?
It could be. The bus drivers don't get a lot of overtime. That's mainly our mechanics.
Okay.
Most of our mechanics have to drive because we don't have enough subs.
Yeah, does that include the fuel for the transportation?
No, fuel was down here. So
Oh,
last year
I see,
budget
yeah.
360,000, I'm going to budget 600,000
Yeah.
next year.
I was gonna say, if
Wow.
it,
Well, probably did just about double.
Yeah. So,
it's just salaries there.
this salary is 2.2. All the other expenses related to transportation, insurance is a big one, fuel's a big one. We've already spent $224,000 in fuel through April. So we just don't know what fuel's going to be. There might be a little bit of cushion in there. 600,000 might be just a tad high.
That's just running through June 30th, correct?
Pardon?
Runs through June 30th.
Yeah, right, around
So your budget current year is what, 360 or something?
360.
And then you spent 224 through the end of March. And
Right.
March would have been the big increase month.
March would, yeah, right now, through April, she's probably not paid the March bill yet, as of April 1st, so that March bill is probably not in this fuel expense, wherever it went. So that's really, we're probably paying for, we probably have April, May, and June. March, April, May, and June. We probably have 4 months to pay yet. Last bill I paid was $68,000, so there's another $280,000 potentially that we added to that.
June shouldn't be too bad though, should it? Well, that actually will come due in July. I was gonna say because school lets out at the end of May, and the summer programs don't really start till on the 1st of July, so.
There'll be some, yeah, June will be a light month, so it may not be all of that, but.
You're probably going to exceed that 360 for this year.
Oh, yeah, I feel pretty confident. Again, that's going to be an area that you'll see me supplement later on at the end of the year, because we're going to come up short of there.
But you're not projecting any increase in gasoline, right? Is that right?
We use so little gasoline, it will be up some, but I didn't increase it.
You know, it's funny too, they dropped the price of gas a little bit, but they didn't diesel.
All diesel went down nickel.
Oh, did it?
Yeah.
I don't know if pumps off. But our diesel, like we did that out, is that for like the year?
For the year. Yeah, so we'll rebid it again in May or June for next year.
Next year.
But again, it doesn't hurt the contractor because they bid their markup. So whatever, if it's $1 a gallon or $3 a gallon, that doesn't hurt them because all they're doing is they're bidding on their product. That small 18 cents per gallon or something.
As you go through that, Kevin, it just reminds us how crucial the excess levy is.
Oh, yeah. That excess levy is $4.3 million of our $43 million budget, or 10%. Can you imagine taking $4.3 million out of this budget? Where would you take it out? I mean, it would be tough.
Yes.
All right, so that's, again, total transportation, a little over 4 million, it was 3.8 last year. It's running 3.5, 3.1, 3.5. With added fuel costs, probably gonna see that, you're gonna see that up in mid-3s to high 3s probably. Miscellaneous expenses, we have an energy savings payment that we make twice a year, it's $179,000 each payment. We have a QZAP payment, which is about $90,000. You can see it went down from 140 to 90. That means we paid off a loan last year, so that's great. And then we traditionally put $20,000 in for turf replacement, and so we'll start that back up for the next round of turf.
How long is that turf good for? I know this last round, it was like 4 years past.
Oh, I think it's because of 8-year warranty. They projected 10, and I think we got like 14 out of it. So
It looks really good.
this is a different company. This is, I haven't been on it, but it looks great
really
for the road.
good. It looks really good.
Yeah, it looks good.
It's better than the other one.
Yeah.
Does it? So total $470,000, 520 last year. The only difference is a decrease in our payment that we won't have to make. Then we get into special ed and a lot of different areas of specialties. $4.4 million, it's just a tad less than last year. Talked to Lydia about her professional services, and we don't really expect that to be, have less contracts next year than we should. We could have decreased that by half. So 4.4, almost 4.5 versus a little over 4.5 last year. Vocational funds, $1 million in salaries. I should have put that in purple. $10,000 from the levy for supplies. Alternative ed, $312,000 next year in salaries, $313 total versus $331 previous year. Community services, our health department, our public libraries, and 4-H, $110,000. It's in the levy for that amount. After-school programs, including band and athletics. So the instructional part of after-school is this top part. So we have about $12,000 in salaries. Then we have $40,000 for bands out of the excess levy. And then we'll have summer programs for driver's ed, so we're on budget $15,000 for that. So the instructional side of extracurricular is $67,000 for next year. Then we get down into coaches, sports, athletics, and such. $412,000 next year versus $461,000. As far as our coaches' salaries go, it's based upon the number of kids that were on the roster in the prior year, even though we've been using the rosters pre-COVID. until we get back in the groove of things. But you can see 304, 293, 290. So I budgeted $300,000. It's gonna be real close probably. Athletics, there's your $48,000 for athletics, $45,000 for admission money. So as far as athletics go, coaches' salaries and the things that are required in the levy, $510,000. And so grand total, $577,000 for extracurricular. So that is mainly your general fund budget. Now, what we're going to talk about next are funds that are set aside either at the state level required, or that we've set them aside separately, or it's a federal grant. And there's not a lot that we can do, or adjustments that you might have would be up in that section. These sections are pretty much set. As I talked about step 7 before, we have $157,000 set aside for salaries. We put some more money in technology. We put instructional purchase services of $20,000. We have instructional supply money and more technology and levy. So a total of $759,000 in step 7.
Now, what is it, Kevin? I think we bought the plan to where there were so often the iPads could be traded in, or how long is that till we have to like refurnish those iPads?
It's on a renewal, a 3-year renewal, I believe. Chris can tell us in more detail about it. We have money set aside in round 3 of stimulus money to replace those. So the refresh, the first refresh will be out of those stimulus funds, which saves, will save the money, the county significant amount of money. And then Chris and I have a plan to set aside money every year for the next refresh. Then special ed, this is, again, state special ed grant. We don't know what it is yet, so we're simply going to budget the same amount. State vocational money is a small grant of $37,000. Staff development. This is required staff development that we talked about earlier. Have to have it. They don't give you money for it, so it comes out of either state aid or our local real estate taxes. Bus replacement, $337,000. We'll use that to replace buses for the upcoming school year.
How many buses will it buy?
3, a little over 3. Yeah.
Well,
Talked to Rocky about, I went back, and he said he knew Pinal County did have air conditioning in some of their buses. He had talked to some people, and it cost the county about $300,000 to retrofit our buses, which we have 45, 50 buses probably. And he said they constantly tear up. And so you almost have to have an HVAC guy on staff just to take care of them. So if you had 40 or 50 of them, it sounds like something's
What
going to
about
work all
going
the time.
forward, when we bid out these buses, could we bid them out with air conditioning?
Could.
And just kind of replace them as we can?
So we'll get some more information and report back.
Especially like I said, the heat of the summer, when, you know, the kids are tired of to like, football games and stuff like that, players, at least when it's so hot in August, you know, when they're doing that. you
It'd be
know.
nice to have a spare, like we had a couple spare buses. We use our spares for bus trips sometimes. So if we had a couple, our spares had air conditioning, then the driver could go get that bus,
Yeah.
take it instead. So,
Yeah, I would imagine it'd be quite a bit less expensive if you bought it already equipped
Yeah.
rather than trying to supplement.
Yeah, just as we replace the buses, make sure that we bid them that way.
Faculty Senate, again, required, but it is funded it's part of our state aid. So that $18 million that we're funded in step 10, part of that has to go to pay for Faculty Senate. And that's one of the subtractions out of that one line to get it down to the $16 million. Curriculum trips, not technically budgeting it here, but I didn't show you that, but it's up in the top part. I budgeted $6,500 for that. Advanced placement, you saw that number earlier. On the revenue side, this is the expense side. Same thing for teacher and leader induction, $62,000. Step 7B, $385,000, that's technology money. Alternative ed is a state grant, we project that to be around $65,000. Not budgeting anything for National Forest Land. Title II, I did get a number on that. Next year they're saying that we'll get $204,000 instead of $217,000. And so projected some salaries on that, and then they have a little bit for other projects or other overhead expenses. This is Title II. It went up a couple $1,000s. Title I went from 1.4 to 1.5 next year. Federal special ed, we don't know. We don't know what that's going to do yet. So I know what the salaries are going to be for it, but I just don't know what the total allocation is going to be. Rural low income, school money, we don't know, budgeted the same amount. Carl Perkins, we don't know, budgeted the same amount. And the food service program, remember I said we keep track of it separately. Our salaries are going to be about 1.3, almost $1.4 million. And when we get down into our food costs, we're expecting it, see I budgeted, last year I budgeted 1.1, I'm budgeting about the same amount, because we were in the same scenario. But you can see food costs, it's higher that year, went down. We maximize all of our commodities, which is food that we can get. Basically, we pay the price of shipping to get it here, and there is a small fee, but it's ridiculously affordable, and it's good, top quality food, just provided through the state program.
You buy it in bulk too, so.
Buy it in bulk. The state buys it in bulk, and then they pass their savings along to all the towns. So total, I'm looking at $2.7 million versus 2.8 that I budgeted last year, 2.3, 2.3, 2.6. So some small fluctuations there in food service. So then we get down to the grand totals. I'm predicting about $32.3 million in salaries, $10.5 million in overhead, so our total grand budget is $42,968,332. And that's just a check. When it's zero, we balance. So,
Kevin, that $42 million total budget, and your revenues, your anticipated revenues, balance equal to your anticipated expenditures, right?
sure.
And food services there on the expenditure side, you showed about $2.7 million, is that correct?
I showed $2.7 million. Yes.
Okay, what do they look like on the revenue side?
The
Food service.
That comes out
food
of
service,
state.
it's the same now. You look at food service, may not be as clear, we'll probably have to add a few numbers together, but
That was in the state aid part, food service.
yeah, I'll try to get down here. Where's that?
They just passed it.
So on the federal programs, you got $1.6 million federally reimbursed, and then you'll add the $1 million that I'm going to kick in.
State.
That's state aid money essentially. So that's 2.6, and then that $40,000 that's up here in catered meals, that'll equal the exact amount that we have budgeted for expenditures.
I think my point is that now we can see clearly that you had to take money out of those regular levy collections, the proposed levy rates, to put into your food service revenues so that you could balance with your food service expenditures,
Yes.
along with federal funding.
Right.
And state aid, and put all three of those together to get that to balance.
Right. Yep. Yeah, and I could pull that from state aid and leave that regular levy alone. It's just a matter of preference. And it's just to be consistent from year to year to year, that's the way I've always done it. And just for consistency purposes, I pull that contribution that we have to put into the state aid or into food services, I just pull that out of regular levy taxes.
I just wanted to clarify that what we said when we accepted the levy rates the other day, that $5 million of regular levy funds, and you showed $4 million up there, that the rest of that, as we've said several times here, the rest of that is in the food services.
Yep.
Balances that out, to make sure that balance out in the revenue section.
You're absolutely correct.
Any questions?
That's where we stand as far as expenses go. Have any questions?
So now you'll put this down the column?
I will, so my next steps for this is I'll begin to enter this into Weebus over the next couple of weeks. And then 10 days prior to our second meeting in May, I'll put it out on public comment. And then we'll have a hearing on that second meeting. And then we'll answer any questions the public may have. If we need to adjust the budget at that point, we will, based upon your all's direction. If not, I'll ask you guys to adopt the budget for the upcoming school year. And once you do that, then I will then submit that electronically to the state. The state will take that to the State Board of Education, and they will approve that prior to July 1. And then it will be in force July 1.
I do the budget at church, which is much smaller than $42 million. I can't do that. Now, I have to explain to them that the budget is just what we think we're going to have, both on the revenue side and the expenditures we think we're going to have. It's like a rubber band. It can expand and it can contract. It can go up or down, but it's just a budget.
Right.
It's there's another world out there called actual, what you actually spend and what you actually receive. So, but it's important for the public, I think, to understand the budget is just a budget. And also, I want to just clarify a couple other things. The state requires us to, as a Board of Education, to be audited, right?
Yes.
Every year, and we have to put that out for bid, right?
Every 3 years, we put that out for bid, yes.
And so we do go through an auditing process every year on the previous year's actions,
Correct.
financial actions.
Correct. We just had our audit for FY21 back in February.
You know, a lot of people don't understand. I do the financials and stuff with PSP and procurement. I do the audit, not the audit, but I do the budget projections, and unless you do that, it's kind of hard to see what you do until you do it.
Yeah.
And if you're a little bit familiar with it, then it's more plain to see, you know, what you're doing.
You get a feel for it. I mean,
Yeah.
after 22
And you do,
years.
you go back years, you know, past and bring all that forward and see how much you've increased every year.
Right.
You always make it balance.
We are very
You
fortunate
project.
in this county for 2 reasons. One, we have an excess levy. And so that allows us to do a lot of extra things that people that live by the state aid formula do not have that good fortune. We also have unassigned fund balance, which means you have funds available in the event of emergency or additional projects that you may have. So it takes the stress off of me a little bit, that if we miss something by $10,000 or even $50,000, we have the funds that we can cover that. You know, I don't know if you noticed, I budget very conservatively. Usually my expenditures are on the upper end. My revenues are usually on the lower end, and it's worked out over the last couple decades. So
Always makes you feel better at the end of the year whenever you get all your totals in and you're in the black.
yeah, yeah.
I think it worked out real well for the treasurer before you too as well.
Did it? I think so too.
Hey,
You
Kevin,
remember who that was?
I
That's
don't
so
even
long
remember
ago.
some guy, I don't know.
people might not be aware of the fact that the board audits each school each year, and then the private firm audits the board.
Well, you're right. We used to have an in-house auditor that audited each school, and then she retired, and now we actually pay an independent accounting firm, CPA firm, to come in and do agreed-upon procedures at each school, and then that is a part of they audit each individual school, and then they are part of my countywide budget as well. So they look at everything from top to bottom.
And I think it's important to get it out there too. Like I said, whenever you get audited or whenever the board gets audited, then whoever audits you, then the state auditor audits them. So they just started that, what, a couple years ago or so, where, I know the past couple years at PSD, I get a bill from the state auditor where they've audited my auditor.
Oh, well, they've done that forever. I mean, we
Maybe
pay
because-
8% fee to the state auditor to, I assume, review our auditors' records. Yeah. And then, of course, then every CPA firm that does audits, there's peer reviews and quality control checks to make sure that they are doing all the things that they're supposed to do as auditors. And then the state auditor has prerequisites in order to be on the bid list. To be a county board of education, you have to pass their tests. So when I put it out for bid, I have a list from the state that says these are the only qualifying CPA firms in the state that you can use. And so we'll put it out, we'll send it to several of those, and then determine who we're going to go with.
Well, they, I don't know if they do it here, but they sent out a list of all the accounting firms in the state that are qualified to do the type of audit. Like we have
Yeah.
done in PSD, and they'll probably do the same here. So you can choose 3 of those to get bids from, or you can put it out to bid, and then you.
Yeah, we send it to a lot of them. We send it to more than 3.
Kevin, in auditing the individual schools, some of them are very small amounts with smaller schools, and then there's something pretty large with the the secondary schools and career center. Are there, in those, what about quasi-public funds, like band boosters or athletic group or whatever? Are those considered a part of the school's funding?
They are a quasi-public entity. They are operated basically at the will and pleasure of this board. We have only 3 in the county. We have 2 band boosters and 1 athletic booster. And PTOs, PTAs, they would fall into that same category. They are audited, subject to our school audits, and so we review those as well. But they maintain their own records. They are not required to follow all of the rules that schools are. They're not. We're more strict, where we require purchase orders and we require 2 signatures. Even though those are great things, they're not required to follow those. But they are audited. All their revenues, all their expenditures are sampled and checked for accuracy and legality.
Kevin is actually more strict than what the rules call for. I mean, he always looks at different thresholds, lower amount. I mean, he's very, very, very strict on all of it. And that's probably why he's had 0 findings for many years.
I think it's important for us as a board to know those things that we are ultimately responsible for out there. You can't remember everything, but there's a lot that goes into being on the Board of Education, a lot of responsibility that carries, particularly in the area of finance. So I just wanted to bring that up. Insurance-wise, I know there's several hundreds of thousands of dollars we have to pay out in insurance premiums a year. Who's our insurance carrier? And
We're required to have our liability insurance through BRIM.
what's BRIM? The Board of Risk?
It's the Board of Risk and Insurance Management,
Okay.
which is a state insurance program. We carry our property insurance through them as well, and then we also carry flood insurance through the West Virginia or National Flood.
NFIP.
Yeah, NFIP, flood insurance program. So yeah, all that's probably $130,000 a year, those types of insurances.
Are there any further questions for the treasurer in regard to this very exhilarating and enlightening. It was very good.
I'm sorry.
It was great.
It's pretty dry stuff, but.
It was really great, I enjoyed it. So, any further questions for Mr. Hess in regard to finance, the budget presentation?
Well, at least we know you just don't sit back there and twiddle your thumbs.
Been a busy guy. Well, hearing none, Mr. Hess, thank you very much. And that does represent not just a few hours, many hours of preparation to get to this point.
Yeah, we started back in, well, actually, we start thinking about it in December, so.
That's when you get your comps, so you start thinking about it back in those days. Okay, hearing no further questions, again, thank you, Mr. Hess. I appreciate you and your department and all the work that you do put into keeping us solvent and taking care of our finances.
You're welcome.
That's the final item on today's agenda. Is there a motion to adjourn this afternoon's meeting? Yeah, so moved. Mr. Amy moves. Is there a second to the motion?
Second.
I'm going to give that to Mrs. Kaufman, if you don't mind. Mr.
Why didn't even hear her?
Mrs.
I'm
Kaufman,
quiet
is it okay if I
today.
give it to Mr. Barry?
No.
We already had one.
Okay. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, like sign. Madam Secretary, we are adjourned at 12:07 p.m.
Thanks, Kevin.